Hello and welcome to my channel, and today is Monday, and that makes today True Crime and Makeup Monday. As always, we have graphic content, so content warning. If you can't handle blood, gore, and graphic crime scenes, I would suggest going to a different video. Otherwise, let's get started. Today we're going to be talking about the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. It was a terrorist bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama on September 15, 1963. The bombing was committed by a white supremacist terrorist group. 4 members of a local Ku Klux Klan chapter planted 19 sticks of dynamite attached to a timing device beneath the steps located on the east side of the church. Described by Martin Luther King Jr. as one of the most vicious and tragic crimes ever perpetrated against humanity, the explosion at the church killed 4 girls and injured between 14 and 22 other people. Although the Federal Bureau of Investigation had concluded in 1965 that the bombing had been committed by 4 known KKK members and segregationists, Thomas Edwin Blayton Jr., Herman Frank Cash, Robert Edward Chambliss, and Bobby Frank Cherry, no prosecutions were conducted until 1977 when Robert Chambliss was tried by Attorney General of Alabama Bill Baxley and convicted of the first-degree murder of one of the victims, 11-year-old Carol Denise McNair. As part of a revival effort by states and the federal government to prosecute cold cases from the civil rights era, the state placed both Blanton Jr. and Cherry on trial, who were each convicted of 4 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison in 2001 and 2002, respectively. So, not that long ago. Future United States Senator Doug Jones successfully prosecuted Blanton and Cherry. Herman Cash died in 1994 and was never charged with his alleged involvement in the bombing. The 16th Street Baptist Church bombing marked a turning point in United States during the Civil Rights Movement and also contributed to support for the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 by Congress. In the years leading up to the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, Birmingham had earned a national reputation as a tense, violent, and racially segregated city in which even tentative racial integration in any form was met with violent resistance. Not uncommon in the South. Martin Luther King Jr. described Birmingham as probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Birmingham's Commissioner of Public Safety, Theophilus Eugene Bull Connor, led the effort in enforcing racial segregation in the city through the use of violent tactics. Yeah, not very good, I guess, at being Commissioner of Public Safety, huh? Guess you're only providing safety to the people that you want to give safety to, is what it sounds like. Black and white residents of Birmingham were segregated between different public amenities such as water fountains and places of public gathering such as movie theaters. The city had no black police officers or firefighters, and most black residents could expect to find only menial employment in professions such as cooks and cleaners. So, essentially keeping them doing slave work, which is not cool. And we were trying to get out of that, but Birmingham was like, no. Black residents did not just experience segregation in the context of leisure employment, but also in the context of their freedom and well-being. Given the state's disenfranchisement of most black people since the turn of the century, by making voter registration essentially impossible, a few of the state's black residents were registered to vote. Bombings at black homes and institutions were a regular occurrence, with at least 21 separate explosions recorded at black properties and churches in the 8 years before 1963. However, none of these explosions had resulted in fatalities. These attacks earned the city the nickname Bombingham. Creative, are we? All right. Civil rights activists and leaders in Birmingham fought against the city's deeply ingrained and institutionalized racism with tactics that included the targeting of Birmingham's economic and social disparities. Their demands included such as lunch counters and parks be desegregated. The criminal charges against demonstrators and protesters should be removed, and an end to overt discrimination with regards to employment opportunities, which, you know, they have as much right to earn money as the rest of us, even back then, and I've always believed that. But, you know, 1960s were rough. 70s weren't much better, but they weren't horrific. The intentional scope of these activities was to see this end of segregation across Birmingham and the South as a whole. The work these civil rights activists were engaged in within Birmingham was crucial to the movement, as the Birmingham campaign was seen as guidance for other cities in the South with regards to rising against segregation and racism. At least that was the idea. But there were people against that idea. Evidently, that's why we're here. It's sick. I'm so glad we don't live like that anymore, because it's fucked up, man. The 3-story 16th Street Baptist Church was a rallying point for civil rights activities through the spring of 1963, when the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the Congress on Racial Equality became involved in a campaign to register African Americans to vote in Birmingham. Tensions in the city increased. We want equality, but we want equality on our terms. We don't want equality if it changes how we have to do things. And that's the sad truth anymore. Even now, we're like that. You know, we want change, but we don't want change that affects the way that we live. And it's kind of sad to, like, research cases like this and look and be like, we're like that now. That's not a good thing. The church was used as a meeting place for civil rights leaders such as Martin Luther King Jr., Ralph Abernathy, and Fred Shuttlesworth for organizing and educating marchers. It was the location where students were organized and trained by the SCLC Director of Direct Action, James Bevel, to participate in the 1963 Birmingham Campaign's Children's Crusade. English is not my first language today, apparently. After other marches had taken place. On Thursday, May 2nd, more than 1,000 students, some reportedly as young as 8, opted to leave school and gather at the 16th Street Baptist Church. Demonstrators present were given instructions to march to downtown Birmingham and discuss with the mayor their concerns about racial segregation in the city and to integrate buildings and businesses currently segregated. Although this march was met with fierce resistance and criticism, and 600 arrests were made on the first day alone, the Birmingham campaign and its Children's Crusade continued until May 5th. The intention was to fill the jail with protesters. These demonstrations led to an agreement on May 8th between the city's business leaders and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to integrate public facilities, including schools, in the city within 90 days. The first 3 schools in Birmingham to be integrated would do so on September 4th. These demonstrations and the concessions from city leaders to the majority of demonstrators' demands were met with fierce resistance by other whites in Birmingham. In the weeks following the September 4th, integration of public schools. 3 additional bombs were detonated in Birmingham. Other acts of violence followed the settlement. And several staunch Klansmen were known to have expressed frustration at what they saw as a lack of effective resistance to integration. As a known and popular rallying point for civil rights activists, the 16th Street Baptist Church was an obvious target. In the early morning of September 15th, 1963, 4 members of the United Klans of America. You know, they're a lot more, like, discreet about it now. Not saying that they don't still exist, because obviously they do. They're just more discreet about it now because, like, it's a known, like, bad thing to be a Klansman. So, like, they're more discreet about it now. But, like, back then, from all the research I've done into, like, this time, especially down south, they were very obvious about it. And it wasn't a problem. It wasn't unusual. It wasn't considered negative or bad. And, like, that seems like such a foreign concept to me. Because, you know, nowadays we'd be like, that's not something to brag about, Chad. Just saying. Thomas Edwin Blanton Jr., Robert Edward Chambliss, Bobby Frank Cherry, and allegedly, because they could never question or prosecute him, we have to say allegedly, because he was never actually prosecuted. So we can't say he for sure committed the crime because he was deceased before they found out if he was involved. Planted a minimum of 15 sticks of dynamite with a time delay under the steps of the church close to the basement. At approximately 10:22 a.m., an anonymous man phoned in the 16th Baptist Street Church. The call was answered by the acting Sunday school secretary, a 15-year-old girl named Carolyn Mall. The anonymous caller simply said the words, 3 minutes, to Mall before terminating the call. Less than 1 minute later, so not even giving them the 3 minutes that they could have had to, like, get people out, or get some people out at least. They didn't even give them the 3 minutes. What was the point of calling and saying 3 minutes if you weren't going to give them 3 minutes? The bomb exploded. 5 children were in the basement at the time of the explosion, in a restroom close to the stairwell, changing into choir robes in preparation for a sermon entitled, "A Rock That Will Not Roll." According to one survivor, the explosion shook the entire building and propelled the girls' bodies through the air like flying rag dolls. That would be, like, if you did survive, I don't know, I feel like I would be, like, I mean, obviously, you would be traumatized for, like, life. You just watched your friends die, essentially. The explosion blew a hole measuring 7 feet in diameter in the church's rear wall and a crater 5 feet wide and 2 feet deep in the ladies' basement lounge, destroying the rear steps to the church and blowing a passing motorist out of his car. So the explosion did not just affect the church. They were effectively able to injure somebody that was driving by. So that should give you, like, an idea of just how forceful this explosion was. You got a passing motorist, somebody who wasn't even in the church parking lot. This is, like, on a road near said church. It's not even somebody in the parking lot, and you blew him out of his car. Several other cars parked near the side of the blast were destroyed, and windows of properties located more than 2 blocks from the church were also damaged. They managed, with 15 sticks of dynamite, to, successfully not only obliterate a church, but vehicles in the parking lot, building windows that were nearby, and what hits me when I think about this and I see all the damage that they were able to create is that they only killed 4 people. And I'm not saying that like, oh, good thing it was only 4, because you know what, you suck. And they were children. Most of them were children. But you successfully only killed 4 people. So was the intention numbers of murder, like numbers of death, or was the intention just destruction of the building and people happened to be collateral damage? I don't understand it. I just don't understand it, because you didn't kill. I mean, you kill people, and that's horrible. Don't get me wrong, but like, if the goal was like numbers of like to get the world's attention by murdering people, you really didn't get the numbers that you probably should have gotten. I mean, they obviously got national media attention, but then you don't even admit that you did it, like, because you're too fucking chicken to get in trouble. So, like, what was the point? If it wasn't going to bring attention to the movement, because they're not going to admit, obviously, that they were responsible and that they did this. So what was, like, the point? If you weren't going to be boss enough to be like, yeah, I did it. I did it for my movement. Like, what was the point? What was the point of hurting people for no reason? All but one of the church's stained glass windows were destroyed in the explosion. The sole stained glass window, largely undamaged in the explosion, depicted Christ leading a group of young children. Effective. You know what? That's great. That's absolutely great, in my opinion. Couldn't have been a better stained glass window to survive. 4 girls. Addie Mae Collins, age 14, born April 18th, 1949. Carol Denise McNair, age 11, born November 17th, 1951. Carol Rosamond Robertson, born April 24th, 1949, age 14. And Cynthia Diane Wesley, age 14, born April 30th, 1949, were killed in the attack. So when I said they were children, I mean literal children. These aren't like, 17, 18, 19-year-old girls. These are children. Somebody's small children that they just obliterated. And there was no need for it. Like, I get that the times were different, but, like, they were kids. They were children. I always hate cases that involve the deaths of children. It's always so hard to do. Because, like, I get into my head and I get into my, like, feelings. And then I'm like, what would they have been like if they were still alive today? And blah, blah, blah. You know? That's just me. That's just me. The explosion was so intense that one of the girls' bodies was decapitated and so badly mutilated that her body could only be identified through her clothing and a ring. That's horrible. And then you get the notification that your child is dead. And not only is your child dead, but they can't even find all the pieces of them for you to bury. That's so screwed up, in my opinion. Like, that's just... Another victim was killed by a piece of mortar embedded in her skull. The pastor of the church, the Reverend John Cross, recollected in 2001 that the girls' bodies were found stacked on top of each other, clung together. All 4 girls were pronounced dead on arrival at the Hillman Emergency Clinic. Hundreds of individuals, some of them lightly wounded, converged on the church to search the debris for survivors as police erected barricades around the church, and several outraged men scuffled with police. An estimated 2,000 black people converged on the scene in the hours following the explosion. The church's pastor, the Reverend John Cross Jr., attempted to placate the crowd by loudly reciting the 23rd Psalm through a bullhorn. Between 14 and 22 additional people were injured in the explosion, one of whom was Addie Mae's younger sister, 12-year-old Sarah Collins. She had 21 pieces of glass embedded in her face and was blinded in one eye. In her later recollections of the bombing, Collins would recall that in the moments immediately before the explosion, she had watched her sister Addie tying her dress sash. Another sister of Addie Mae Collins, 16-year-old Junie Collins, would later recall that shortly before the explosion, she had been sitting in the basement of the church reading the Bible and had observed Addie Mae Collins tying the dress sash of Carol Denise McNair before she returned upstairs to the ground floor of the church. So because she left the room, she survived. Again, I don't know how you would deal with that. Violence escalated in Birmingham in the hours following the bombing, with reports of groups of black and white youth throwing bricks and shouting insults at each other. Police urged parents of black and white youths to keep their children indoors as the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, ordered an additional 300 state police and 500 Alabama National Guardsmen to assist in quelling unrest. So it got attention, and it did get, you know, the attention that they wanted brought to the situation. But now you have to bring in all these other people, and we're basically at this point, you're declaring a state of house arrest. That's essentially what this is. You've brought in people that are now going to make sure that nobody is seen outside of their houses after a certain time, and I don't know if that was the goal, but like, now you've just put your whole state in a state of unrest, and now you're under house arrest, essentially. The Birmingham City Council convened an emergency meeting to propose safety measures for this. The Birmingham City Council convened an emergency meeting to propose safety measures for the city, although proposals for a curfew were rejected. Within 24 hours of the bombing, a minimum of 5 businesses and properties had been firebombed, and numerous cars, most of which were driven by whites, had been stoned by rioting youths. In response to the church bombing described by the mayor of Birmingham, Albert Boutwell, as just sickening, the Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy dispatched 25 FBI agents, including explosive experts, to Birmingham to conduct a thorough forensic investigation. Although reports of the bombing and the loss of 4 children's lives were glorified by white supremacists, who in many instances chose to celebrate the loss as 4 less blanks. I won't use that word. I'm sorry. I absolutely will not. Not even in a segment, not in my research. I just won't use it. It's not appropriate. As news of the church bombing and the fact that the 4 young girls had been killed in the explosion. I'm so sorry, y'all. I don't know what is wrong with me today. I'm struggling to talk. Had been killed in the explosion reached the national and international press. Many felt that they had not taken the civil rights struggle seriously enough. The day following the bombing, a young white lawyer... I'm going to resign from English. All right, a young white lawyer named Charles Morgan Jr. addressed a meeting of businessmen condemning the acquiescence of white people in Birmingham toward the opposition of blacks. In this speech, Morgan lamented who did it, the bombing. We all did it. The who is every little individual who talks about blanks and spreads the seeds of his hate to his neighbor and his son. What's it like living in Birmingham? No one ever really has known, and no one will until this city becomes part of the United States. A Milwaukee Centennial editorial opened for the rest of the nation. The Birmingham church bombing should serve... Sorry, I can't talk and do these freckles at the same time. I don't know if she had freckles, but you know what? It's fine. For the rest of the nation, the Birmingham church bombing should serve to goad the conscience. The deaths, in a sense, are on the hands of each of us. 2 more black youths, Johnny Robinson and Virgil Ware, were shot to death in Birmingham within 7 hours of the Sunday morning bombing. Richard Robinson, age 16, was shot in the back by Birmingham police officer Jack Parker as he fled down an alley after ignoring police officers' orders to halt. The police were reportedly responding to black youths throwing rocks at cars driven by white people. Robinson died before reaching the hospital, where age 13 was shot in the cheek and chest with a revolver in a residential suburb 15 miles north of the city. A 16-year-old white youth named Larry Sims fired the gun given to him by another youth named Michael Farley at Ware, who was sitting on the handlebars of a bicycle ridden by his brother. Sims and Farley had been riding home from an anti-integration rally which had denounced the church bombing. When he spotted Ware and his brother, Sims fired twice, reportedly with his eyes closed. Sims and Farley were later convicted of second-degree manslaughter, although the judge suspended their sentences and imposed 2 years probation upon each youth. Because they were children, I hope. Some civil rights activists blamed George Wallace, governor of Alabama, and an outspoken segregationist for creating the climate that had led to the killings. 1 week before the bombing, Wallace granted an interview with the New York Times in which he said he believed Alabama needed a few first-class funerals to stop racial integration. The city of Birmingham initially offered a $52,000 reward for the arrest of the bombers. Hold on, sorry. For the rest of the bombers. Governor Wallace offered an additional $5,000 on the behalf of the state of Alabama. Although this donation was accepted, Martin Luther King Jr. is known to have sent Wallace a telegram saying, "The blood of 4 little children is on your hands. Your irresponsible and misguided actions have created in Birmingham and Alabama the atmosphere that has induced continued violence and now murder." Carol Rosamond Robertson was laid to rest in a private family funeral held on September 17th, 1963. Reportedly, Carol's mother, Alpha, had expressly requested that her daughter be buried separately from the other victims. She was distressed about a remark made by Martin Luther King, who had said that the mindset that enabled the murder of the 4 girls was the apathy and complacency of black people in Alabama. The service for Carol Rosamond Robertson was held at St. John's African Methodist Episcopal Church. Sorry, that was a lot of words. In attendance were 1,600 people. At this service, the Reverend C.E. Thomas told the congregation, "The greatest tribute you can pay to Carol is to be calm, be lovely, be kind, be innocent." Carol Robertson was buried in a blue casket at Shadow Lawn Cemetery on September 18th. The funeral of the 3 other girls killed in the bombing was held at the 6th Avenue Baptist Church. Although no city officials attended the service, an estimated 800 clergymen of all races were among the attendees. Also present was Martin Luther King Jr. In a speech conducted before the burials of the 4 girls. King addressed an estimated 3,300 mourners, including numerous white people, with a speech saying, "This tragic day may cause the white side to come to terms with its conscience. In spite of the darkness of this hour, we must not become bitter. We must not lose faith in our white brothers. Life is hard, at times as hard as crucible steel, but today you do not walk alone." As the girls' coffins were taken to their graves, King directed that those present remain solemn and forbade any singing, shouting, or demonstrations. These instructions were relayed to the crowd present by a single youth with a bullhorn. Initially, investigators theorized that a bomb thrown from a passing car had caused the explosion at the 16th Street Baptist Church. But by September 20th, the FBI was able to confirm that the explosion had been caused by a device that was purposely planted beneath the steps to the church, close to the women's lounge. A section of wire and remnants of red plastic were discovered there, which could have been part of a timing device. The plastic remnants were later lost by investigators. Within days of the bombing, investigators began to focus their investigators began to focus oh my god, their attention upon a KKK splinter group known as the Cahaba Boys. The Cahaba Boys had formed earlier in 1963 as they felt that the KKK was becoming restrained and impotent impotent in response to concessions. That's not good. I lost it, and I don't know where it is, and now the look is messed up. Maybe not. Maybe I can make this work. I can. Sweet. Okay. This group had previously been linked to several bomb attacks at Black-owned businesses and the homes of Black community leaders throughout the spring and summer of 1963. Although the Cahaba Boys had fewer than 30 active members, among them were Thomas Blanton Jr., Herman Cash, Robert Chambliss, and Bobby Cherry. Investigators also gathered numerous witness statements attesting to a group of white men in a turquoise 1957 Chevrolet who had been seen near the church in the early hours of the morning of September 15th. That's broken. Okay. These witness statements specifically indicated that a white man had exited the car and walked toward the steps of the church. The physical description by witnesses of this person varied and could have matched either Bobby Cherry or Robert Chambliss. Chambliss was questioned by the FBI on September 4th, 1963. He and two acquaintances, John Hall and Charles Cagle, were each convicted in a state court upon a charge of illegally possessing and transporting dynamite on October 8th. Each received a $100 fine equivalent to $1,000 in 2023 and a suspended 180-day jail sentence. At the time, no federal charges were filed against Chambliss or any of his fellow conspirators in relation to the bombing. The FBI encountered difficulties in their initial investigation into the bombing. A later report stated by 1965, we had 4 serious suspects, namely Thomas Blanton Jr., Herman Frank Cash, Robert Chambliss, and Bobby Frank Cherry, all Klan members, but witnesses were reluctant to talk and physical evidence was lacking. Also at this time, information from our surveillance was not admissible in court. As a result, no federal charges were filed in the 60s. On May 13, 1965, local investigators in the FBI formally named Blanton, Cash, Chambliss, and Cherry as the perpetrators of the bombing, with Robert Chambliss the likely ringleader of the 4. The information was relayed to the director of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. However, no prosecutions of the 4 suspects ensued. There had been a history of mistrust between local and federal investigators. And later the same year, J. Edgar Hoover formally blocked any impending federal prosecutions against the suspects and refused to disclose any evidence his agents had obtained with state or federal prosecutors. In 1968, the FBI formally closed their investigation into the bombing without filing charges against any of their named suspects. The files were sealed by order of J. Edgar Hoover. Way to go, J. Edgar. The Birmingham campaign, the March on Washington in August, the September bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, and the November assassination of John F. Kennedy, an ardent supporter of the civil rights cause who had proposed a Civil Rights Act of 1963 on national television, increased worldwide awareness of and sympathy towards the civil rights case in the United States. Following the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963, newly inaugurated, I was gonna say that wrong, I know I was, President Lyndon Johnson continued to press for passage of the civil rights bill sought by his predecessor. On July 2nd, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson signed into effect the Civil Rights Act of 1964. In attendance were major leaders of the civil rights movement, including Martin Luther King Jr., This legislation prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, gender, or national origin to ensure full, equal rights of the African Americans before the law. Officially, the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing remained unsolved until after William Baxley was elected Attorney General of Alabama in January of 1971. Baxley had been a student at the University of Alabama when he heard about the bombing in 1963 and later recollected, "I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what." Within 1 week of being sworn into office, Baxley had researched original police files into the bombing, discovering that the original police documents were mostly worthless. Baxley formally reopened the case in 1971. He was able to build trust with key witnesses, some of whom had been reluctant to testify in the first investigation. Other witnesses obtained identified Chambliss as the individual who had placed the bomb beneath the church. Baxley also gathered evidence proving Chambliss had purchased dynamite from a store in Jefferson County less than 2 weeks before the bomb was planted. Upon the pretext of the dynamite was to be used to clear land the KKK had purchased near Highway 101. This testimony of witnesses and evidence was used to formally construct a case against Robert Chambliss. After Baxley requested access to the original FBI files on the case, he learned that evidence accumulated by the FBI against the named suspects between 63 and 65 had not been revealed to the local prosecutors in Birmingham. Although he met with initial resistance from the FBI in 1976, Baxley was formally presented with some of the evidence which had been compiled by the FBI after he publicly threatened to expose the Department of Justice for withholding evidence which could result in the prosecution of the perpetrators of the bombing. On November 14, 1977, Robert Chambliss, then age 73, stood trial in Birmingham Jefferson County Courthouse. Chambliss had been indicted by a grand jury on September 24th of 1977, charged with 4 counts of murder for each dead child in the 1963 church bombing. But at a pretrial hearing on October 18th, Judge Wallace Gibson ruled that the defendant would be tried upon 1 count of murder, that of Carol Denise McNair, and that the remaining 3 counts of murder would remain, but he would not be charged in relation to these 3 deaths. Before his trial, Chambliss remained free upon a $200,000 bond raised by family and supporters and posted October 18th. Chambliss pleaded not guilty to the charges, insisting that although he had purchased a case of dynamite less than 2 weeks before the bombing, he had given the dynamite to a Klansman, an FBI agent provocator named Gary Thomas Rowe Jr. To discredit Chambliss's claims that Rowe had committed the bombing, prosecuting attorney William Baxley introduced 2 law enforcement officers to testify as to Chambliss's inconsistent claims of innocence. The first of these witnesses was Tom Cook, a retired Birmingham police officer who testified on November 15th as to a conversation he had with Chambliss in 1975. Cook testified that Chambliss had acknowledged his guilt regarding his 1963 arrest for possession of dynamite, but that he and Chambliss were insistent he had given the dynamite to Rowe before the bombing. Following Cook's testimony, Baxley introduced Police Sergeant Ernie Cantrell. He testified that Chambliss had visited his headquarters in '76 and that he had attempted to affix the blame for the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing upon an altogether different member of the KKK. Cantrell also stated that Chambliss had boasted of his knowledge of how to construct a drip method bomb using a fishing float and a leaking bucket of water. Upon cross-examination by defense attorney Art Haynes Jr., Cantrell conceded that Chambliss had emphatically denied bombing the church. One individual who went to the scene to help search for survivors, Charles Vann, later recollected that he had observed a solitary white man whom he recognized as Robert Edward Chambliss, a known member of the Ku Klux Klan, standing alone and motionless at a barricade. According to Vann's later testimony, Chambliss was standing looking down toward the church like a firebug watching his fire. One of the key witnesses to testify on behalf of the prosecution was the Reverend Elizabeth Cobbs, Chambliss's niece. Reverend Cobbs stated that her uncle had repeatedly informed her he had been engaged in what he referred to as a one-man battle against blacks since the 1940s. Moreover, Cobbs testified on November 16th that on the day before the bombing, Chambliss had told her that he had in his possession enough dynamite to flatten half of Birmingham. Cobbs also testified that approximately 1 week after the bombing, she had observed Chambliss watching a news report relating to the 4 girls killed in the bombing. According to Cobbs, Chambliss had said the bomb, wasn't meant to hurt anybody. It didn't go off when it was supposed to. Another witness to testify was William Jackson, who testified as to his joining the KKK in 1963 and becoming acquainted with Chambliss shortly thereafter. Jackson testified that Chambliss had expressed frustration that the Klan was dragging its feet on the issue of racial integration, and that he was eager to form a splinter group more dedicated to resistance. In his closing argument before the jury on November 17th, Baxley acknowledged that Chambliss was not the sole perpetrator of the bombing. He expressed regret that the state was unable to request the death penalty in this case, as the death penalty in effect in the state in 1963 had been repealed. The current state death penalty applied only to crimes committed after its passage. Baxley noted that the day of the closing argument fell upon what would have been Carol Denise McNair's 26th birthday, and that she should have likely been a mother by this date. He referred to testimony given by her father, Chris McNair, about the family's loss, and requested that the jury return a verdict to the guilty. Following the closing arguments, the jury retired to begin their deliberation, which lasted for over 6 hours and continued into the following day. On November 18, 1977, they found Robert Chambliss guilty of the murder of Carol Denise McNair. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for her murder. At his sentencing, Chambliss stood before the judge and stated, "Judge, Your Honor, all I can say is God knows I have never killed anybody, never have bombed anything in my life. I didn't bomb that church." On the same afternoon that Chambliss's guilty verdict was announced, Prosecutor Baxley issued a subpoena to Thomas Blanton to appear in court about the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. Although Baxley knew he had insufficient evidence to charge Blanton at the stage, he intended the subpoena to frighten Blanton into confessing his involvement and negotiating a plea deal to turn state evidence against his co-conspirators. Blanton, however, hired a lawyer and refused to answer any questions. Chambliss appealed his conviction as provided under the law, stating that much of the evidence presented at his trial, including testimony relating to his activities within the KKK, was circumstantial. In 1995, 10 years after Chambliss died, the FBI reopened their investigation into the church bombing. It was part of a coordinated effort between local, state, and federal governments to review cold cases of the civil rights era in the hopes of prosecuting perpetrators. They unsealed 9,000 pieces of evidence previously gathered by the FBI in the 60s. Many of these documents relating to the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing had not been made available to DA William Baxley in the 70s. In May 2000, the FBI publicly announced their findings that the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing had been committed by 4 members of the KKK splinter group known as the Cahaba Boys. The 4 individuals named in the FBI report were Blanton, Cash, Chambliss, and Cherry. By the time of the announcement, Herman Cash had also died. However, Blanton and Cherry were still alive, and both were arrested. On May 16, 2000, a grand jury in Alabama indicted Thomas Blanton and Bobby Cherry on 8 counts each in relation to the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. Both named individuals were charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of universal malice. The following day, both men surrendered to the police. The state prosecution had originally intended to try both defendants together. However, the trial of Cherry was delayed due to the findings of a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation. It concluded that vascular dementia had impaired his mind, therefore making Cherry mentally incompetent to stand trial or assist in his own defense. On April 10th of 2001, Judge James Garrett indefinitely postponed Cherry's trial pending further medical analysis. In January of 2002, Judge Garrett ruled Cherry mentally competent to stand trial and set an initial trial date for April 29th. Blanton Jr. was brought to trial in Birmingham, Alabama before Judge James Garrett on April 24th of 2001. Blanton pleaded not guilty to the charges and chose not to testify on his behalf throughout the trial. In his opening statement to the jurors, defense attorney John Robbins acknowledged his client's affiliation with the KKK and his views on racial segregation, but he warned the jury, quote, "Just because you don't like him, that doesn't make him responsible for the bombing," end quote. The prosecution called a total of 7 witnesses to testify in their case against Blanton, including relatives of the victims, John Cross, the former pastor of the 16th Street Baptist Church, an FBI agent named William Fleming, and Mitchell Burns, a former Klansman who had become a paid FBI informant. Burns had secretly recorded several conversations with Blanton in which the latter had gloated when talking about the bombing and had boasted the police would not catch him when he bombed another church. Most crucially, Blanton can also be heard saying that he was not with Miss Vaughn, but 2 nights before the bombing was at a meeting with other Klansmen on a bridge above the Cahaba River. He said, you've got to have a meeting to plan a bomb. The trial lasted for 1 week. Several witnesses testified on behalf of the prosecution and 2 for the defense. One of the defense witnesses was a retired chef named Eddie Molden, who was called to testify to discredit prosecution witnesses' statements that they had seen Blanton in the vicinity of the church before the bombing. Molden testified on April 30th that he had observed two men in a Rambler station wagon adorned with a Confederate flag repeatedly drive past the church immediately before the blast, and the seconds after the bomb, the car burned rubber as it drove away. Blanton had owned a Chevy in 1963. Neither Chambliss, Cash, nor Cherry had owned such a vehicle. Both counsels delivered their closing arguments before the jury on May 1st. It was in his closing argument, prosecuting attorney and future U.S. Senator Doug Jones said that although the trial was conducted 38 years after the bombing, it was no less important, adding, "It's never too late for the truth to be told. It's never too late for a man to be held accountable for his crimes." That is a confession out of this man's mouth. Cherry was tried in Birmingham, Alabama before Judge James Garrett on May 6, 2002. Cherry pleaded not guilty to the charges and did not testify on his own behalf during the trial. I failed to mention, sorry, I skipped some notes here. Blanton was convicted and he died of unspecified causes on June 6, 2020. Cherry's defense attorney, Mickey Johnson, protested his client's innocence, stating that much of the evidence presented was circumstantial. He also noted that Cherry had initially been linked to the bombing by the FBI via an informant who had claimed 15 months after the bombing that she had seen Cherry place the bomb at the church shortly before the bombing. Barbara Ann Cross also testified for the prosecution. She is the daughter of the Reverend John Cross and was age 13 in 1963. Cross had attended the same Sunday school class as the four victims on the day of the bombing and was slightly wounded in the attack. On May 15th, Cross testified that prior to the explosion, she and the four girls killed had each attended a Youth Day Sunday school lesson in which the theme taught was how to react to a physical injustice. On May 21st, 2002, both prosecution and defense attorneys delivered their closing arguments to the jury. In his closing argument for the prosecution, Don Cochran said the victim's youth Sunday sermon never happened because it was destroyed by this defendant's hate. In the closing argument for the defense, attorney Mickey Johnson argued that Cherry had nothing to do with the bombing and reminded the jurors that his client was not on trial for his beliefs, stating, quote, "It seems like more time has been spent here throwing around the N-word than proving what happened in September of 1963. Johnson stated that there was no hard evidence linking Cherry to the bombing, but only evidence attending to his racist beliefs dating from that era, adding that the family members who had testified against him were all estranged and therefore should be considered unreliable witnesses. Following these closing arguments, the jury retired to consider their verdicts. These deliberations continued until the following day. On the afternoon of May 22nd, after the jury had deliberated for almost 7 hours, the four women announced they had reached their verdicts. Bobby Frank Cherry was convicted of 4 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Cherry remained stoic as the sentence was read aloud. Relatives of the 4 victims openly wept in relief. This whole Cherry motion to the When asked by the judge whether he had anything to say before sentence was imposed, Cherry motioned to the prosecutors and stated, "This whole bunch lied through this thing. I told the truth. I don't know why I'm going to jail for nothing. I haven't done anything." Bobby Cherry died of cancer on November 18, 2004 at age 74 while incarcerated at the Kilby Correctional Facility. Which is probably the vascular dementia, just saying. Although both Blanton and Cherry denied their involvement in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. Until his death in 1985, Robert Chambliss repeatedly insisted that the bombing had been committed by Gary Thomas Rowe Jr. Rowe had been encouraged to join the Klan by acquaintances in 1960. He became a paid FBI informant in 1961. In this role, Rowe acted as an agent provocateur between 1961 and 1965. Although informative to the FBI, Rowe actively participated in violence against both black and white civil rights activists. By Rowe's own later admission, while serving as an FBI informant, he had shot and killed an unidentified black man and had been an accessory to the murder of Viola Luazzo. Following the bombing, the 16th Street Baptist Church remained closed for over 8 months as assessments and later repairs were conducted upon the property. Both the church and the bereaved families received an estimated $23,000, $228,900 in 2023, and cash donations from members of the public. The most severely injured survivor of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, Sarah Jean Collins, remained hospitalized for more than 2 months following the bombing. Collins's injuries were so extensive that medical personnel did initially fear she would lose the sight in both eyes, although by October they were able to inform Collins she would regain the sight in her left eye. When asked her feelings towards the bombers on October 15th, Collins first thanked those who had cared for her and sent messages of condolence, flowers, and toys. Then said, "As for the bomber, people are praying for him. We wonder what he would be thinking today if he had children. He will face God. We turn this problem over to God because no one else can solve Birmingham's problems. We leave it up to God to solve them." Charles Morgan Jr., the young white lawyer who had delivered an impassioned speech on September 16, 1963, deploring the tolerance and complacency of much of the white population of Birmingham towards the suppression and intimidation of blacks, thereby contributing to the climate of hatred in the city, himself received death threats directed against him and his family in the days following his speech. Within 3 months, Morgan and his family were forced to flee Birmingham. James Bevel, a prominent figure within the civil rights movement and organizer of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was galvanized to create what became known as the Alabama Project for Voting Rights as a direct result of the bombing. Following the bombing, Bevel and his then-wife Diane relocated to Alabama, where they tirelessly worked upon the Alabama Project for Voting Rights, which aimed to extend full voting rights for all eligible citizens of Alabama, regardless of race. Within the Baptist Church, there still stands the Welsh window, sculpted by artist John Petts, who had initiated a campaign in Wales to raise money to fund a replacement stained glass window, which had been destroyed in the bombing. Within 2 days of the church bombing, Petts had contacted then pastor of the church, the Reverend John Cross, announcing he had launched a fundraising campaign to create this artwork via an appeal conducted through the Western Mail. John Petts died in 1991 at the age of 77. Naturally, as a father, I was horrified by the deaths of those children. Truly, I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me. On the 27th anniversary of the bombing, a state historic marker was unveiled at Greenwood Cemetery, the final resting place of 3 of the 4 victims of the bombing. Carol Robertson's body had been reburied in Greenwood Cemetery in 1974 following the death of her father. Not really sure why they would do that. Several dozen people were present at the unveiling, presided over by State Senator Roger Bedford. At the service, the 4 girls were described as martyrs who died so freedom could live. Herman Frank Cash died of cancer in February of 1994. He was never charged with his alleged involvement in the bombing and did maintain his innocence. Although Cash is known to have passed a polygraph test in which he was questioned as to his potential involvement in the bombing, the FBI had concluded in 1965 that Cash was one of the 4 conspirators. The Reverend John Cross, who had been the pastor of the Baptist Church at the time of the 1963 bombing, died of natural causes on November 15th of 2007. He was 82 years old. The Reverend Cross is interred at Hillendale Memorial Gardens in DeKalb County, Georgia. Former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice was 8 years old at the time of the bombing and both a classmate and friend of Carol Denise McNair. On the day of the bombing, Rice was at her father's church, located a few blocks from the 16th Baptist Church. I remember the bombing of that Sunday school at 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham in '63. I did not see it happen, but I heard it happen, and I felt it happen, just a few blocks away at my father's church. It is a sound that I will never forget, that will forever reverberate in my ears. That bomb took the lives of 4 young girls, including my friend and playmate Carol Denise McNair. The crime is calculated, not random. It was meant to suck the hope out of young lives, bury their aspirations, and ensure that old viewers would be propelled into the next generation. On May 24, 2013, President Barack Obama awarded a posthumous, I don't know why I said that way, Congressional Gold Medal to the 4 girls killed in the 1963 Birmingham church bombing. This medal was awarded through signing into effect Public Law 113-11, a bill which awarded 1 Congressional Gold Medal to be created in recognition of the fact that the girls' deaths served as a major catalyst for the civil rights movement. The gold medal was presented to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute to display or loan to other museums. And that is the story of the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing. It's a very sad case. It should never have happened, and those girls should never have been killed. I chose this just to kind of bring attention to, like, you know, the fact that we're kind of like in a situation where we're kind of like repeating history. Y'all know what I'm talking about? So, yeah. Don't be like these guys. Be better. Do better. Stand up for your fellow people. As always, please don't do anything I wouldn't do. Be cautiously kind to others and make good choices. And I'll see y'all next week. Bye.